Hi, my name is Gino Miele. I like it when people call me Gino. This screencast video is going to focus on working in Lightroom, in particular on how to set up methods of comparison. In choosing images to work on and in developing raw files, one of the most important aspects of the workflow is deciding what looks better based on what looks better, not what we think. And there are quite a few ways that we can check that so that we can make visual comparisons so that we don't get lost in projecting our ideas about an image onto the image, but rather we decide what looks better. That's a really, really reliable way to go. There are aspects of this in the development workflow, and here we are in the library before we even get into raw development. And one of the things I want to share is that by selecting a number of images that are similar, that is in this case shift clicking, of course you can also command click a number of images, by highlighting a number of images and going into the compare mode, that is down here, this little XY, what happens is we're set up with a select image and a candidate. Instead of trying to remember which of these images looks better or scrolling back and forth, what we can do by hitting the C key to go into compare mode, right? That is selecting a bunch of images and hitting the C key or clicking at the bottom. What we can do is we can set up a choice between two images. Oftentimes, what we're doing is we're comparing a before and after. In this case, it's not before and after, but which image do we like best? By hitting the tab key, we can increase our real estate. And what happens in this mode in the library, not in the develop module, because this is different than before and after, what happens is we can choose between these two pictures. We can even click and zoom in to see what's sharper or to check details. But the basic choice is I can dismiss one or the other. And by hitting the I key, we see that we have number 171 on the left and 177 on the right. Let's say I like 177 better. I click on the X to dismiss 171, and you'll see that 177 has replaced it on the left side as the select. If I have 2 pictures or 100 pictures, reducing the choice to a choice between 2 pictures makes a lot of sense to me. What we can also do while we're here with pictures that we might like to look at again is we could just put a star on them. So let's say I like the one on the right better, so 180 now replaces 177, and I don't like the one on the right. This is all totally arbitrary. Oh, the next one in the line comes up, but I might want to come back to this one on the left, so I'm putting 1 star, and I'm going to dismiss this, and then 185 moves from the candidate position to the select position. If I like this one better, right, and I click on the left to dismiss 185, then that moves into position. And of those images, I like this the best, so I'm going to give this 2 stars. It looks like I might have selected more images, but these are the similar ones. And so I've reduced 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 images down to 2. So now what I could do is I could go into the menu and say view, right, not compare, but survey mode, and it'll show me those 2 pictures side by side. In fact, survey mode will also allow me to select multiple images, 3 at a time, and survey mode, the keyboard shortcut is N. And so I can see 3 pictures at a time, and I could rearrange them or I could dismiss one. These are all ways of making good decisions about which pictures I'm going to work on. The reason I'm showing you the compare mode before I go into the develop module is because there are a number of ways to make comparisons in the develop module, and I don't want you to confuse the compare mode with the before and after mode in the develop module. What that looks like on a picture that has a history, that has a bunch of stuff done to it, it looks like this. So we click on this before and after mode, which looks very much like the compare mode, but what it's showing us is it's showing us the very first step in the history compared to where we are currently at the top of the history. Another way to access this other than clicking on the button down here, and it shows you, is to click on the Y key. And so the Y key in the develop module, not in the library, shows us a before and after of a picture that's been worked on. Let's pop back to the library for a second. I'm doing that by hitting the G key for grid mode. Now, what I have here is I have a raw file, and then I also have an enhanced DNG of that raw file. Now, the reason that I have that is because I noticed in this raw file that it was a little bit noisy. You can see the grain in here. And so what I did was I right-clicked on that thumbnail, went into the enhance mode, and had it create a denoised DNG file. So how can I figure out whether that actually was an improvement? I can select both of them and go into the compare mode because I'm in the library, and I can see side by side that the original NEF is much noisier than the enhanced noise reduced DNG. There are a number of different modes in the compare mode, and what that means is I'm getting confused myself. Skip that. This is just another way that the compare mode can help us, because we can zoom in, we can zoom out, we can scroll around and see parallel aspects of the image, and that really helps us make good decisions. Let's move over to the develop module and take a look at the developed version of the enhanced DNG. So I'm selecting that image, I'm hitting D for develop, and what we're seeing is a picture that's already been worked on. I'm just noticing there's another piece of dust up here, and so I'm going to just retouch that really quickly. I'm going to zoom into 100% to check my work, and I'm going to see if I can see that retouching at 100%, and I can't, and that's really critical. Another aspect of comparing is zooming in and out, and so when we're doing retouching, zooming to 100% to check our work, to make sure it's invisible at 100% so it doesn't show up in a print, is really crucial. So, to get back to this idea of before and after, I can see the before and after side by side in the develop module by clicking on this little icon down here, or by hitting the Y key. What I can also do is I can hit the backslash key, which is on the right side of my keyboard between the return key and the delete key. And what that does is it gives me a before and after overlaid on itself. And of course, I can also zoom in and see that before and after overlaid on itself as well. These are all really, really useful. Inside this icon here, and a triangle always shows us there's something more, I can choose to see the before and after left and right, which is my preference, but there are other ways to do it. You can split the image and zoom in. I find this less helpful. Or what we can do is set top and bottom images. If you go into this menu, you will inevitably find your view different than this. I prefer setting this view up in the beginning and then just using the Y key rather than clicking on this icon to avoid getting lost in those views. As I mentioned, the default before and after, the default before is the bottom of the history. It's that first step. If I want to see some other stage of my development as the before, there's a really elegant and slightly complicated way to do that. For example, if I arbitrarily choose some midpoint in the history as the before, because I want to see what it looked like at a certain point, all I have to do is right-click in the history and then use this menu to quote-unquote copy history step settings to before. I think that's a really, really bad label. I think this should say, make this the before. And so when I do that, what you'll see is that the before changes. And instead of seeing the completely undeveloped picture, I'm seeing the picture developed, but before I made a slight change to the angle and shape of the image. What's important to remember when we change the before setting is that we're not clicking in the history, because what that'll do is bring us back to a different working point. And then if we do something, everything above this white line will disappear. So we're leaving this highlight, which indicates where we currently are in the history. We're generally leaving that at the top, which is why it's important that you right-click to access this menu, not click, then right-click. We don't want to move this highlight. The highlight should remain at the top. So in order to change our before state, we are right-clicking in the history and copying history step settings to before. We're not actually copying anything. We're just making this the before. And so I can change the before state to anywhere in the history in order to find out whether what I've done is better or worse. Let's return this before all the way to the beginning, and let's do something else to the picture. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that I make the picture really blue, and I want to check whether that's better or worse than where I just was. I simply go back one step before the action I took, make that step before the history, make that step one step ago the before by right-clicking, not clicking, and then I can decide whether I like where I am now better than the before. If I don't, I can undo and readjust my picture. Undo. Or what I could do if I make that step again, right, and make this the before. It's a little confusing because when you mouse over the history, it actually shows you in the after what that looks like. If I take the cursor out of the picture, it's very clear that the left before was one step ago, and this is when I changed the temperature. What I can also do to undo that is go one step back, right-click, and say Clear History above this step. And that temperature adjustment will simply disappear. There will be many times when you will want to be able to set up a comparison like this. And there are many, many other ways to set up points of comparison other than changing the before in the history and using the before and after mode. For example, if I want to see what the net result of all the retouching I did was, I simply open up this retouching panel, actually called the healing panel. And what I see is that inside this panel and every other panel, there's a little eyeball. What that eyeball does is it temporarily turns off anything that's been done that's covered by this panel. So if I zoom in, what I see is that there are lots of pins, retouching points. And if I click this off, they turn themselves off temporarily so I can check my work. As I zoom in, I see there are a lot of points here. If I turn it off, I can see that there was a sign on a fence by the side of the road and that I don't see any of my work. Similarly, there was a bunch of stuff that was retouched that were dust spots. And so I can turn things on and off just to check, and I can visualize spots and move in just to see, for example, where there might have been sensor dust. So here I'm going to zoom in. There's the pin. Turn it on and off. Oh, there's that sensor dust. And the retouching was effective. What you'll find with masks and with this healing panel is that these pins can be very, very distracting. The default mode that Adobe sets up down here at the bottom is to always show the pins. It makes it really hard to see your work when that's happening. And so what I recommend is that you change this to auto. This is also in all the masks. And what that means is when my cursor is in the picture, all these spots are visible. And when I simply move my cursor out, they disappear. That's really, really helpful. Resist the temptation to click on never, because then you won't be able to access your pins. You won't be able to move them, delete them, modify them, or see them. So auto is a great way to go. I mentioned that there are other ways to set up comparisons. So as I said, each panel has an eyeball. So if I turn off everything that was done in the basic panel, I can see whether that's better or worse. Every one of these points of comparison is a lot like going to the eye doctor when they test you for a new prescription. What they do is they change lenses in front of your eye and they say better or worse, better or worse. Each one of these eyeballs asks that same question. Is this better or worse? 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 Avail yourself of these points of comparison so that you can decide whether you're making the picture better or worse as you go. It's really necessary to zoom in to see the effect of many of these things. For example, a moment ago, I turned this on and off and I don't really see much of a difference. But when I zoom into 100% and I turn this on and off, on and off, on and off, I can evaluate the degree of sharpening and the masking that I've done. So don't forget, with retouching, with sharpening, with adding presence to your image, that is texture or clarity, that you might not see what's happening unless you're zoomed in. And another way to check my work is to simply go back in the history. I can just go back and forth and see whether things are better or worse. And clearly that's making things worse. And so I can go back here a couple of steps and say clear the history above this step. A big part of the workflow process that I advocate is taking little incremental steps, making good small decisions in a particular order in order to have that add up to a dramatic transformation. Using these points of comparison helps you make those small decisions well. Similarly, you can just use a single slider to say, is this better or worse? And sort of zero in on exactly the right spot by going too far one way, too far another way, and then just looking at the picture rather than the slider to find exactly the right setting. And then I can check that, and I really ended up in pretty much exactly the same place. Anyway, using the compare mode in the library to take a look at images side by side, hitting the tab key so you get maximum real estate, zooming in, scrolling around. That's a way to make better decisions. In the develop module, using the eyeballs, making sure that you have auto turned on so your pins go on and off, zooming in, zooming out, checking what happens in terms of each panel. These are all really good ways to make decisions. And perhaps most critically, being able to change the before state in your before and after so that you can either see the whole transformation in all its drama, or you can see simply what one change does compared to where you were before you made that change. These are all super, super powerful tools for making good visual decisions. Get rid of that, come back to here, and I for info to get rid of those little words up there, right? Because we cycle through that. I hope this is really helpful, and I thank you.